She was already sitting down. Not arriving, not being shown to the table, and not scanning the room for the right face. Already seated. Her back to the window, the sole skyline behind her in soft focus. A glass of wine she had ordered for herself because she was not the kind of woman who waited for permission to begin. Her dress was green. Not the safe, muted green of someone trying to blend. A deep, deliberate emerald that she had chosen that morning from the back of a closet she had rebuilt from nothing over the past 14 months. She had bought it with her own money. That detail mattered to her more than the color. Across from her, Calloway Vanier leaned back in his chair and laughed at something she had said. And the laugh was real, not performed. The kind that arrives before a person can decide whether to allow it. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm, and he looked at her like she was the most interesting problem he had encountered in a year. And he meant it as a compliment, and she had not decided yet whether she was going to let that matter. 3 tables away, near the entrance, standing absolutely still with his coat still on and his reservation still in his hand, Shindayul watched them. He had not expected her. He had come for a business dinner scheduled 11 days ago, and confirmed twice. He had walked in and turned toward the dining room and seen her immediately, because he had always seen her immediately, in every room, from the first night. It was automatic, directional. The way certain instruments point north without being told. His chief of staff, Quan Min-jae, 2 steps behind, reading his stillness and saying nothing because Min-jae had been with him for 9 years and knew the difference between Shin Dae-yul pausing and Shin Dae-yul breaking. This was neither. This was something Min-jae had not seen before. A man arriving at a door he had closed himself and finding someone else's light coming through it. If you are watching this, and you think you know what this story is about, a powerful man who lost the best thing in his life and came crawling back, I need you to hold that thought. Because this is not a crawling back story. This is a story about what a woman builds when the person who was supposed to stand beside her decides she is not enough. And what it costs a man when he finally sees clearly and the view is someone else sitting where he used to sit, laughing the way she used to laugh with him. Except the laugh is lighter now. Freer. Like something has been removed from it. Subscribe now and stay with me, because the way these two got here is the part that changes everything. 14 months earlier. The apartment had been quiet for 3 days. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had learned to exist in the same space without noise. The surgical quiet of someone who had already made a decision and was managing the aftermath before the other person knew there was an aftermath to manage. Orenthia Coyote Maddox sat on the edge of their bed and watched Dale move through the closet with the efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this. He was not packing. He had packed yesterday while she was at the university. What he was doing now was removing the last of his presents in the particular order he had determined would cause the least disruption. She did not ask where he was going, because he had told her 4 days ago in a conversation that had lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes to dismantle 7 years. She had counted, not on purpose, but because her mind did that, went to numbers when the words stopped making sense. What he had said, reduced to its operational core, was this. The board was restructuring. His family, specifically his mother, Park Yoon-ji, had made it clear that his career now demanded an alignment not compatible with the marriage he had chosen. He had used the word chosen without irony, as though the 7 years and the 3 miscarriages and the apartment they had built together room by room had been a selection from a catalog he was now returning. He said, "I want you to know this is not about what I feel." She looked at him. 7 years of looking at this man. She knew every version of his face, the public one, the private one, the one he wore when he was afraid and would not say so. This was a new one. The face of a man performing a decision he had made for reasons he would never be able to explain honestly, not to her, not to himself. Then what is it about? It is about what is required. Required by whom? He did not answer. Park Yoonji's name occupied the room without being spoken, the way it always had, a presence felt in the architecture of every choice Daeul made, every dinner they attended, every holiday Orenthia spent alone because the family gathering did not extend an invitation to her, every silence that followed someone asking about his wife at a company function and Daeul answering in a way that acknowledged her existence without confirming her importance. 7 years of that. 7 years of being the answer he gave quietly and never the one he gave proudly. Say her name, Daeul. The optics have become untenable. Optics. The word a person uses when they mean something uglier but need it to sound structural. Optics meant her face at his company gala. Optics meant every room she walked into where someone did the calculation, the foreign wife, the black wife, the one who did not fit the frame they had built for a man like Shin Daeul. You are leaving me, she said, not a question, a fact she was placing on the table between them so that neither of them could pretend it was something else. Because your mother has decided that a black woman is bad for business. He flinched. It was small, and she caught it, and she understood in that moment that he knew exactly what he was doing and had chosen to do it anyway. That was worse than ignorance. This was clarity dressed as obligation. Get out, she said. Pick up your boxes and leave. He left. She heard the door close. She heard the elevator arrive and depart. Then she sat in the quiet and did not cry and did not break. She sat there until the light changed. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, made herself tea, and began the list. The list was how she survived. Not optimism, not faith, not the particular brand of resilience people like to assign to women who looked like her, as though endurance were genetic instead of chosen. The list, practical, immediate, ordered. Visa, tied to the university, still valid. Money, her own salary, plus savings her mother had told her to keep. Always keep money he does not know about, because trouble does not ask permission. Space. The apartment was too full of him. And item 4, do not disappear. She was going to show up to her lectures. She was going to eat meals at regular intervals. Not because she felt like it, but because discipline was the bridge you walked across when the ground fell out. If you think this is the part where she crumbles and he comes back with flowers, let go of that. Because what Orenthia did next is the reason this story exists. Comment below. Have you ever watched someone choose status over love? Because Daeul's regret is coming, and it arrives in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, in the last place he expected to find it. She moved to Yeonnam-dong 5 weeks later. 3 rooms, no elevator. A landlady named Bae Soonja who said, "The woman before you was also divorced and she played music at 3 in the morning. This is not that kind of building. Your hot water takes 4 minutes. Do not call me about it." She went back to work. Without the Shin name, she was what she had always been. Brilliant, exacting, and unwilling to be managed. Her research gained traction. Papers accepted. Conference invitations. She called her brother, Kehinde, in Lagos every Sunday. He asked if she was happy. She said she was getting there. He said, "Ren, do not get there slowly. The world does not wait for women who arrive carefully." 9 months after the divorce, she was at a faculty reception when Callaway Venier crossed the room toward her. Tall, Trinidadian British, founder of a technology firm that had spent 3 years methodically acquiring market share in sectors Shin Daeul's company considered their territory. The press called him Daeul's rival. "I read your paper on diaspora and urban reconstruction," he said. The section on linguistic displacement was unlike anything else in the field. The linguistic displacement section was on page 47. 3 paragraphs, buried inside a methodological framework most readers skipped entirely. "You read the full paper," she said, "twice. The first time for comprehension, the second time because I wanted to understand how you built the argument. They talked for 40 minutes. He did not mention Dayol. He did not mention the divorce. When he left, he gave her his card. If the research goes where I think it is going, I would like to fund it. No conditions. She did not call for 3 weeks. When she did, they met for coffee, then lunch, then dinner. Each meeting occupying more of the space between professional and personal, and neither of them naming the shift. Subscribe right now if you want to see what Dayol's face looks like when he realizes it, because that moment is coming, and it is worse than you think. The first 3 months after the divorce, Shin Dayol performed his life flawlessly. He moved back into the family residence in Seongbuk-dong. Park Yoonji was satisfied. She had 3 candidates selected before the ink was dry, women from families whose names appeared in the right directories, whose faces would photograph correctly beside her son at the functions that mattered. She used the word realigned, a word that allowed her to erase 7 years without acknowledging they had contained a person. Dayol attended the dinners she arranged. He was courteous to each candidate. He asked questions. He listened to their answers. He was present in the way that a man can be present at a table without being present in a room, and Unji noticed and said nothing because the presence was sufficient for the photographs, and the photographs were what she required. That lasted 12 weeks. The fracture started small. A Tuesday evening in his home office, reaching for a pen. Not any pen. The pen with the tortoise-shell cap that Arenthia had found in an antique shop in Insadong 4 years ago. They had been walking through the narrow streets on a Saturday with no agenda, which was rare for him, and she had stopped at a display case and pointed and said, "This looks like it was waiting for you." He had carried it every day since. He held it now and understood that it was not a pen anymore. It was a unit of measurement. It measured the distance between who he was when she handed it to him and who he was now, and the distance was the kind you feel in your chest, not your head. Month 4, month 5. The board was pleased with his focus. The stock price responded to stability, and Dayol was hollowing out. Min-jae saw it because Min-jae always saw it. He remembered when Arenthia would come to the office on Friday afternoons, standing in the reception area in whatever she had been wearing at the university that day, and Dayol would actually leave on time. This was the most extraordinary thing Min-jae had ever witnessed in 9 years of service. Shin Dayol did not leave on time for shareholders, for board members, for his mother. He did not leave on time for anyone, except he did. He left on time for her, and now the Fridays were the same length as every other day, which meant they were all too long, which meant nothing ended because nothing was pulling him home. Then came the restaurant. He arrived for his dinner with Yoon Tae-shik, the telecom division head, walked in, turned toward the dining room, and saw her, Arenthia, in a green dress he had never seen, sitting across from Callaway Vignier, and Callaway was laughing, and she was the reason, and the laugh was real. It was the kind of laugh that comes from a man who has found something he was not expecting, and the something was her, and she was allowing it. She looked free. And the freedom was worse than anything else she could have shown him. Anger he could have understood. Sadness he could have absorbed. Freedom was a country he had no passport to, and she had crossed the border without looking back. And the view from where she sat was clearly better than anything he had offered her. He sat down. He conducted the dinner. For 2 hours and 14 minutes, he sat with his back to her and did not turn around. Not once. Yoon Tae-shik talked about quarterly projections, and Dayol responded with the correct words in the correct order, and none of them reached him. She had seen him too. She recognized his posture before his face, the particular way he held his shoulders when he was managing something internal. She watched him not look at her and knew, with 7 years of clarity, that he had seen her. The not looking was too deliberate, too controlled. It had the quality of a man holding a door shut from the inside. Calloway noticed. He was observant in the way that people who have built things from nothing tend to be, because building from nothing teaches you to read rooms. "Your former husband is here," he said. Not whispering, not dramatic, just a fact placed on the table with the same care he placed everything. "Would you like to leave?" The willingness to leave a restaurant he had reserved 3 weeks in advance, to stand up and walk out and find somewhere else, simply because she might be uncomfortable, was a thing she filed in the place where she kept evidence of who Calloway Vanier actually was. The file was getting thicker. She was paying attention to that. "No," she said. "I would like to hear about Adiambo and her buildings." They stayed another hour. When they left, she laughed at something he said near the entrance, and the laugh carried because the acoustics of that corridor were designed to carry sound, and she did not know Dayol could hear it. She was not thinking about him. She was thinking about the specific, unfamiliar feeling of being with someone who did not require her to be smaller than she was. She was thinking about how freedom tasted different than she expected. Not sweet, clean, like cold water after a long time without it. In the car, Minjae drove in silence for 6 blocks before Dayol spoke. "Find out everything about Calloway Vanier's relationship with Orenthia." Minjae said. "Is this a business inquiry?" "No." Minjae pulled the car to the curb. He did not often stop the car for conversations, and Dayol understood that the stopping meant something was coming that Minjae believed required stillness. "Then I need to say something I have not said in 9 years of working for you. You made a choice. She is living with the result of that choice. What you do with this information will determine whether you are a man who respects the consequences of his own decisions or a man who believes his regret entitles him to re-enter a life he voluntarily left. Those are not the same man, sir. And I know which man I would prefer to work for. But you are the one who has to live in the answer." The car was quiet. Soul moved around them, indifferent. Comment below. When you saw the person who left you happy without them, what did it do to you? Because that feeling is about to drive every decision in this story. 3 days later, Park Yoonji received a phone call from Bong Kyung-hee, a woman whose information was always accurate and whose motivations were never charitable. "Your former daughter-in-law was seen with Calloway Vanier at a restaurant in Gangnam. They appeared intimate. I thought you should know." The last sentence was the tell. Bong Kyung-hee never thought anyone should know anything unless the knowing caused damage. Yoonji modeled the scenario with the speed of a woman who had spent 40 years reading boardrooms. Orenthia, with 7 years of proximity to Shin family dynamics, 7 years of access to conversations and strategies and vulnerabilities, in the arms of their most significant competitor. She called Dayol. "Come to the house. Tonight." He came. She was in the study, standing, which meant the conversation was not going to involve sitting down. "That woman spent 7 years inside this family," Yoonji said. "She knows our vulnerabilities, and she is now sharing a table with a man whose sole objective is to dismantle what your father built." "She is not a security threat," Dayol said. "Everyone is a security threat. You taught me that." "No, you taught me that. And I have spent the last 14 months discovering how much of what you taught me was wrong." He stood. "I had someone extraordinary, and I let her go because you told me she did not fit. And now she is sitting across from another man in a green dress I have never seen, laughing a laugh I have not heard in over a year. And the laugh is better. She is happier. Without us. Without this house and everything in it." He walked to the door. "The next candidate dinner you arrange, cancel it. I am done performing your correction." Yoonji stood in her study. Something had shifted in the architecture of this family, and she could not yet tell whether it was a crack or a door. That same week, at 1:53 in the morning, Calloway called. Orenthia was at her desk, editing the book that had grown out of her research, when his name appeared on her phone. "Ren." He had never called her that before. It was her brother's name for her, mentioned once over dinner 3 months ago. My company has acquired a controlling interest in Shin Industries' semiconductor division. The deal closed this afternoon. The announcement goes out at market open. She sat very still. This deal has been in motion for 18 months. It predates you. It predates us. I did not pursue you to get to him. I am telling you now because I will not build anything with you that has a lie at the foundation of it. Not even a lie of omission. You knew when you approached me at the reception. I knew I was in active negotiations with your ex-husband's company. Regulatory constraints prevented disclosure. That is a legal answer, and it is also the true answer. The timing is terrible, she said, and the optics are worse. I am aware that optics is probably the worst word I could use with you. I need to think, she said. I am going to decide what I think when I have had enough time to separate what I feel from what is true. Take whatever you need. I am not going anywhere. She hung up and sat in the dark apartment for a long time. The news would break in 6 hours. The social dimension would surface by evening. Photographs of her and Calloway would circulate. The narrative would assemble itself with the speed of something that had been waiting for an excuse to exist, the black ex-wife and the rival CEO, as though her entire life could be reduced to the space between two men. She called Kehinde in Lagos at dawn. "Is the man good?" he asked, before she had finished the first sentence. "The man is complicated." "Ren, is the man good?" She thought about the phone call. The timing. The choice to tell her before the market opened instead of after, when disclosure would have been easier but the lie of omission would have already calcified. "Yes," she said. "I believe he is good." "Then the rest is details. Manage the details. You have always been better at details than anyone I know." Yoonji, meanwhile, moved through channels. Calls to legal. Calls to the board. The involvement of the former daughter-in-law warranted scrutiny. Daeul found her in the garden, near the persimmon tree his father had planted the year Daeul was born. "You are not protecting this family. You are protecting the decision you made 14 months ago. And the narrative is collapsing, and you cannot allow that, because if it collapses, then the decision was not strategic. It was cruel." Yoonji looked at him, then at the tree. "Your father married me because his family approved. I was the suitable candidate. I spent 32 years wondering if he ever loved me for something other than what I represented. I decided suitability was enough." She paused. "I was wrong, and I made you wrong in the same way. I will stop the calls." Then she did something no one expected. She drove to Yeonam-dong, climbed 3 flights of stairs, knocked. She told Orenthia the truth that had been underneath every silence for 7 years. "I did not remove you because you were black. I removed you because you were powerful. The other thing made it easier, made it sellable." What it was, underneath, was a woman afraid of losing control of her son to someone who loved him better than she knew how to. Orenthia looked at this woman in her doorway. 7 years of silences louder than any words. "Come in." They talked for an hour. Not easily, not warmly, but honestly, which was harder than either of those things and worth more. When Yoonji left, she paused at the door. "The man you are seeing, is he worthy of you? I am still deciding." "Decide slowly. You have earned the right. That is the thing I wish someone had told me 40 years ago." 2 weeks later, Orenthia called Calloway. "The acquisition and our relationship are 2 separate things. I believe you, but if you are in my life, you are in it alongside everything I have built. Not above it, not around it, beside it. And if you ever make a decision about my life without asking me first, this ends. Immediately. Understood. Completely." What happens next is the part nobody saw coming. Subscribe now. 6 weeks later, Orenthia received a letter, handwritten on Hanji stationery from a shop in Bukchon, where they had spent an afternoon early in their marriage. She had bought him a box of it because she wanted him to have a reason to return to the expression of wonder he had worn in that shop, the way his hand moved across the paper, as though he were meeting something ancient and recognizing it. He had kept the box for 7 years and never used a single sheet until now. The letter was not an apology. Apologies are about the speaker. This was a confession of comprehension, which is about the person harmed. He wrote that the word optics described a moral failure, not a strategic concern. That the failure was his, not his mother's. That he had inherited a framework for valuing people and had applied it to the one person who deserved to be valued outside any framework. And at the end, a single sentence she read 3 times. You were never the optics problem. I was. I was the thing that did not fit. And I spent 7 years making you carry the weight of my own misalignment. She did not cry. She had not cried over Shin Dae-yul in 15 months, and she was not going to start now. She put the letter in the drawer of her desk, beneath the research notes and the conference programs and the drafts of the book. She did not show it to Calloway. It was about a closed chapter receiving its last annotation. The annotation was accurate. The chapter was still closed, but the letter opened a question she had sealed shut. Not whether she still loved Dae-yul. She did not. The question was about the 3 miscarriages. 3 pregnancies in 4 years. Each one wanted, each one lost. He had held her hand in the hospital each time. He had been there for the procedures and the recoveries. He had done everything that could be seen and measured, but he had not done the one thing that could not be seen or measured, which was to sit with her in the wreckage without trying to organize it. He organized his grief the way he organized his company, with efficiency and forward motion, and she needed him to stop moving and just be there. And he could not, and the could not was part of why the word optics had been possible. A man who could sit in wreckage does not use the word optics about his wife. 3 weeks later, Professor Go told her the university had received a significant donation for a new research center for diaspora studies. The donor had requested she serve as founding director. The donation was made through the Shin Cultural Endowment. She met Min-jae at a coffee shop in Mapo. He arrived in his work suit, which was the only kind of clothing Min-jae appeared to own, and he sat down with the particular care of a man who understood he was about to have a conversation that existed outside his job description, but inside his conscience. Was it him, or was it his mother? Park Yoon-ji, personally, without Dae-yul's knowledge. He found out from the university's development office 2 days after the paperwork was filed and came to my office, and it was the angriest I have seen him in 9 years. He said she had taken the one thing you built entirely on your own and put their name on it. He called her immediately. She did not answer. He drove to Seongbuk-dong and they argued in the study for 40 minutes. What did she say? She said she was helping. She was trying to apologize, Orenthia said. She was trying to apologize in the only language she speaks fluently, Min-jae said. Which is the language of resources. She does not know how to say I was wrong without attaching a budget to it. That is not an excuse. It is a diagnosis. Orenthia took the position. The work was too important, and the resources too significant to refuse on principle. And refusing on principle when the work suffered would have been its own kind of performance, and she was done performing for the Shin family in any direction. But she called Yoonji directly. I am accepting the directorship because the research matters, not because I accept the terms under which it was offered. If you ever again make a decision about my professional life without speaking to me first, I will return every dollar publicly and explain exactly why. Not as a threat, as a boundary. You are correct, Yoonji said. I should have asked. I believe you specifically because a woman who climbs 3 flights of stairs to say the hard thing is capable of change. I am betting on the capability, not the track record. Yunji said something Orenthia had not expected. My husband planted a persimmon tree the year Dayul was born. It is the only thing in that house that grew without my direction. I pruned everything else. The roses, the hedges, the wisteria, all shaped. The persimmon I left alone because my husband asked me to. And it is the only thing more beautiful than I planned. I am starting to think the things I did not plan are the ones that matter. Subscribe, because what happens between Calloway and Dayul is the collision this story has been building toward. And it does not happen with anger. It happens with respect. And respect between two men who want the same woman is the most dangerous thing in this story. The advisory board meeting for the Seoul International Technology and Culture Forum was held in a glass conference room on the 14th floor of a building that looked out over the Han River. The seating was alphabetical. Orenthia Maddox was placed between Shin Daeol and Calloway Venier. She arrived first. Deliberately. She wanted to be seated and occupying her space with the full authority of someone who had arrived on her own terms before either of them walked through that door. Calloway arrived second. He sat down, placed his coffee to the left, nodded to her with the slight lift of his chin that had become their private shorthand for, "I am here. I see you. We are fine." She returned it. Dayul arrived third. He saw the seating arrangement and understood what alphabetical order had done to him. He sat down. He said nothing. For 53 minutes, Dayul was silent. 18 inches from the woman he had divorced, and 24 inches from the man she was now with, and the proximity was operating on him at a frequency the meeting could not reach. Reports were delivered. Questions were asked. He answered when addressed, precisely and competently, because competence was the thing he could always produce, regardless of what was happening beneath it. He volunteered nothing. He kept his hands flat on the table because the pen in his pocket, the one that was not the tortoiseshell pen, but a replacement that weighed slightly less and felt wrong every time he reached for it, would have given him away. Orenthia could feel his stillness. It had a particular quality she recognized from 7 years of marriage, the stillness of a man who was processing something too large for the room he was in. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She had spent 7 years calibrating herself to his silences, and now she used that calibration to measure the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. And the distance was significant. Then the discussion turned to cultural representation in technology policy. Orenthia spoke for 4 minutes about how institutional support for displaced communities followed the interests of the institution rather than the needs of the community. The support was real, she said, but the direction was imposed, and imposition with resources is still imposition. Calloway described his company's approach in Nairobi, where local engineers held equity rather than contracts. Support without ownership, he said, was just a more sophisticated form of control. And then Dayul spoke. The first words he had said voluntarily in 53 minutes. Mr. Venier's model is correct. My family's foundation recently made a donation to a university research center, and I want to acknowledge publicly that the donation was made without consulting the person most affected by it. The instinct to help without consulting the person being helped is not generosity. It is control in a more comfortable outfit. I say this because this room is discussing policy, and policy begins with honesty about the failures that make policy necessary. The room recalibrated. Every person at that table knew who these 3 people were to each other, and the room was watching Shin Daeol choose what kind of man he was going to be. After the meeting, the room emptied slowly. Orenthia turned to Daeol before leaving. That was not easy to say. It was the easiest thing I have said in 17 months. The true thing is always the easiest. I just did not know that until recently. Who taught you that? You did. Every day for 7 years? I was not listening. She stood, collected her folio, and took 1 step toward the door, then turned back. The letter. The one on the Hanji paper. He went very still. The stillness of a man hearing something he did not dare hope for. I kept it. She left. He sat in the empty conference room for a long time. Outside, the Han River moved south in the particular way it moved in autumn, carrying the season's debris toward the sea with the patience of a system that did not require anyone's attention in order to continue. The kept letter was not a door reopening. It was a woman telling a man that his best words had reached her, and that reaching her was not the same as arriving, and that the distance between those two things was the distance he would carry for the rest of his life. She had kept the letter because the letter was true. She had told him she kept it because she wanted him to know that truth reaches a person even when the person who speaks it no longer has the right to stand in the room. The truth lands. The speaker goes home. Min-jae found him 20 minutes later, still seated. The car is ready. She kept the letter, Daeul said. Min-jae paused. He understood immediately what this meant and what it did not mean. That is a gift, he said, not an invitation. Do you understand the difference? I am learning to. Calloway was in the corridor with 2 cups of coffee at the right temperature, because he had been paying attention for 5 months, and he knew what she drank, and when she needed it. He said something honest in that room, Calloway said. Does it change anything? It changes my understanding of him. It does not change my position. And your position is? Beside you. Good. Because I have a question. Adhiambo's buildings in Nairobi. I am going in December. Would you come with me? Not as an observer. As a collaborator. Yes. Comment below. What does it mean to keep a letter from someone you are never going back to? Because the answer to that question is the key to everything that happens next. Bae Soonja stood in her doorway as Orenthia carried her suitcase down the hall, arms crossed. The posture of a woman who had been standing in doorways assessing tenants for longer than Orenthia had been alive. How long? 12 days. Africa. Kenya. Soonja nodded once. The hot water will still take 4 minutes when you return. I am not fixing it while you are gone. It has always taken 4 minutes. It will always take 4 minutes. Some things are consistent. She paused. That is not a flaw. Orenthia liked this woman more every month. The 4-minute hot water had become a kind of anchor, a small reliable inconvenience that reminded her every morning that she lived in a place that did not perform for her and did not need to. Calloway met her at the airport in Nairobi with a driver and no fanfare because he had learned over 7 months that Orenthia Maddox did not respond to spectacle. She responded to substance. The car was comfortable, but not extravagant. He had a folder of the project documents she had asked for. He had coffee, the kind she drank, brought from a place he had found 3 trips ago. She spent 6 days inside the project. Adhiambo's buildings rose from the landscape like statements, not of wealth or ambition, but of understanding. The structures were oriented to catch the prevailing wind, to use the light rather than fight it. Every material was sourced within 200 kilometers. The engineers who ran the systems had grown up in the neighborhoods the corridor was designed to serve. This was not philanthropy. This was architecture that listened before it spoke. On the 7th day, Orenthia presented her findings to Adhiambo's team. She spoke about what the corridor represented in the context of global displacement, how the decision to build with local expertise rather than imported frameworks created a model that could not be extracted or replicated without the community's consent. Adhiambo, who had been sitting with her arms crossed for the entire presentation, uncrossed them. "Where have you been?" she said. "We needed you here 2 years ago." "I was building a floor," Orenthia said. "It took a while." Adhiambo understood the metaphor without explanation, because she was the kind of woman who had built her own floors more than once. They had dinner that night, just the 2 of them, at a restaurant Adhiambo's mother had frequented. They talked for 4 hours and discovered their mothers had been the same kind of woman, the kind who built things with their hands and did not wait for permission and did not explain their decisions to people who had not earned the explanation. They discovered that they had both been told at different points in their careers that their ambition was impressive for someone from their background, and they had both understood that the word impressive in that sentence was a leash disguised as a compliment. "How did you stop hearing it?" Orenthia asked. "I did not stop hearing it. I stopped letting it change my speed." On the 9th night, Calloway took her to dinner on a rooftop under the Nairobi sky. The stars were different here, wider and more numerous, as though the sky had more room for them. The air was warm and carried the scent of something green, something growing, and she felt like the beginning of something. Not a relationship. That had already begun. The beginning of the version of her life that did not have a ceiling on it. The version where the rooms she entered were rooms she had chosen, not rooms she had been directed to. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I spoke to Dale about business. He proposed a collaboration on the Nairobi corridor, the semiconductor components for Adhiambo's environmental monitoring systems, his manufacturing capability, our distribution network, her design framework. I am going to say yes, if you tell me it does not compromise your position." She looked at him, the lights of Nairobi behind him, the coffee he had brought to the airport, the folder, the 7 months of asking before he acted, the phone call at 1:53 in the morning when he could have said nothing, and she would never have known until the morning papers. "Calloway. For 7 years, nobody asked. Decisions were made about my proximity, my visibility, my role in a family that treated me as an accessory to a brand, and nobody asked. Not once. You are sitting here under stars I have never seen before, asking me whether a business decision between you and my ex-husband is acceptable to me. The asking is the thing I value, not the answer. The asking." He reached across the table and took her hand. First time in public. Not performance. Not a statement. Just contact. One person reaching for another because the reaching was true, and the truth of it was enough. Back in Seoul, a text arrived from Daeyul. "Congratulations on Nairobi." She typed 4 words back. "Thank you. Good work." 4 words. The exact weight of what was appropriate between two people who had been everything to each other and were now something else, something without a name, something that required precision. Bae Soonja appeared at her door 2 days after she returned, carrying a container of homemade doenjang. "You have been back for 4 days and you have not eaten properly. I can hear your kitchen. It is too quiet. Eat this with rice. Do not argue with me." She looked at Orenthia the way she had looked at her on move-in day, the same assessment, but the conclusion had changed. On move-in day, the look said, "I am deciding whether you will last." Now it said something else. "You are going to last," Soonja said. Not a question, not a compliment, a fact delivered with the same practical certainty as the 4-minute hot water. "Stay with me. What happens at the hospital and the research center opening is where every thread in this story pulls tight." The call came on a Wednesday. Yoonji had collapsed at the foundation offices. Atrial fibrillation with complications. She would require surgery. Dale stayed at the hospital for 3 days. He sat in the chair beside her bed the way his father had sat in the garden beside the persimmon tree, with the patience of someone who understood that presence was not a task to be completed, but a condition to be maintained. On the 2nd night, a message arrived forwarded through the hospital's patient communication system. From Orenthia to Yoonji. 3 words. "I am here." Daeul read it 3 times. The woman his mother had engineered out of his life, the woman his mother had moved to the side entrance and managed out of family photographs, and kept at the precise distance required to make her feel included enough to stay and excluded enough to know her place. That woman had sent 3 words to the woman who had done the engineering, and the 3 words were not strategic. They were the simplest possible expression of presence, offered without condition to a person who had spent years denying her the same. He showed it to Eunji the next morning. She read it and looked at the window for a long time. "I am going to need to respond to that," she said, "but I do not know how." "You will figure it out," Dale said. "You always do." She responded 2 days later, typing with one hand because the other had an IV line. 12 words that took her 30 minutes to compose. "I am here too. I was not always. I am now. Thank you." The surgery went well. Recovery was slower than Yoonji expected, because Yoonji expected everything to operate on her schedule, including her own body, and her body had decided otherwise. 11 days later, 5 days before the research center's inaugural lecture, she told Daeul she intended to attend. He found her in her dressing room, choosing what to wear with the deliberation of a woman who understood that every public appearance communicated something, and this one needed to communicate change. "You had heart surgery 11 days ago? Your father would have gone." She said this with the particular firmness of a woman who had spent 32 years married to a man she was only now beginning to understand. He believed in showing up. "I spent 32 years thinking that was the lesser skill, the easy virtue, the thing people did when they did not have the power to shape outcomes from a distance. I was wrong. Showing up is the hardest thing. It is the thing I did not do for Orenthia for 7 years, and it is the thing I am going to do now." She went. She sat in the back row, near the exit, in case the surgery protested and she needed to leave without causing a disruption. The auditorium was full. Orenthia spoke for 37 minutes without notes. She spoke about displacement, about what happens when people are moved from the places that made them, about the structures they build in new soil that contain the loss without being defined by it. She spoke about Nairobi and Seoul and Lagos and London and the invisible architecture that displaced people carry with them, the architecture of memory and adaptation and refusal to disappear. When she finished, the applause was real and sustained and carried the quality of an audience that knew it had heard something that would stay with them longer than the evening. In the back row, Yoonji did not applaud, because her hands were trembling, not from the surgery, from something older and harder than a cardiac event, from the experience of watching a woman she had tried to erase stand at a podium and fill a room with the evidence of what erasure could not touch. Daeul was there too, seated in the middle of the auditorium, and he watched his mother in the back row not clapping and understood that the not clapping was not disapproval. It was overwhelm. It was a woman discovering that the person she had underestimated for 7 years was not only surviving, but teaching. She waited until Orenthia crossed the room to her. "The lecture was remarkable," Yoonji said. "The part about building structures that contain the loss without being defined by it. That is not what the research describes." "It is exactly what the research describes." "No. That is what you have done. The research describes a pattern. You are the pattern." She proposed a lecture series. Annual. Endowed. Named after her husband. "Not after me. I want his name on it. He was the one who believed in showing up. I would like you to choose the speakers." "You are asking," Orenthia said. "I am asking. I did not ask last time. I am asking now. That is the only thing I can offer you that has any value, the difference between what I did and what I am doing." "Yes, and you will attend the first one." Something in Yoonji's face broke open the way ice cracks in spring from beneath, where the warmth reaches first and the surface is the last to know. "I will attend every one," she said, "for as long as I am able. Subscribe now. The final 2 chapters are the ones that make sense of everything." Calloway called Daeul's personal number on a Sunday evening. "I think we should talk," he said. "Not about business, not about the corridor or the semiconductor components or any of the things our companies are building together. I think we should talk about the person." Daeul said, My mother's garden. There is a tree. They stood beneath the leafless persimmon tree in the January cold. Two men placed on opposite sides of a woman they both valued by a narrative neither of them had written. The tree was bare, its branches dark against a white sky, holding the shape of something that would return when the season allowed it. The garden was silent except for the wind, which moved through the branches with the indifference of something that had been moving long before either of them arrived and would continue long after they left. I did not come to establish dominance, Calloway said, and I did not come to seek your blessing, because that would imply you have authority over her choices, which you do not. I came because the conventional architecture of this situation, rivals, the man before and the man after, is inadequate for who she is. She deserves men in her life who have moved past the convention. Dale looked at this man. He had studied Calloway Vanier for 2 years, first as a competitor, then as a threat, then as the person sitting across from Orenthia in a green dress. He had expected to feel rivalry. What he felt instead was the uncomfortable clarity of standing next to someone who had done the thing he could not do, which was to see Orenthia clearly and choose her publicly, and bear the cost of the choosing without asking her to make it easier. I did not lose her because of you, Dale said. He said this slowly, with the weight of a man who had spent months arriving at a sentence and needed every word to land correctly. I lost her because I was not brave enough to keep her. You found her because you were brave enough to approach her. Those are separate events that share a person. I did not find her, Calloway said. She was not lost. She was standing by a window at a faculty reception with a glass of water, being exactly herself, and I walked over because the exactness was extraordinary. She decided the rest. She decided to have coffee. She decided dinner. She decided Nairobi. She decided all of it. She decides, Dale said. She decides, Calloway said. They shook hands in the garden beneath the persimmon tree. Not warmly, not coldly, with the precise weight of two men who had arrived at an understanding that existed outside the categories available to them. It was not friendship. It was not forgiveness. It was two men acknowledging that the most important person in both of their lives had made her choices, and the choices were hers, and their job was to be worthy of whichever side of the choice they stood on. After Calloway left, Dale stood under the tree for a long time. The cold was the kind that settled into the hands and the jaw, and the spaces between the ribs where a person carries the things they do not say. He had not planned Orenthia. She had arrived in his life at a conference in London 9 years ago. He had seen her across a crowded room, near a window, holding a glass of water with the particular stillness of someone who did not need the room to notice her, and he had crossed to her the way Calloway had crossed a faculty reception years later, drawn by the same quality, the completeness, and she had chosen everything that followed. She had chosen to love him, to marry him, to endure his mother and his silences and the side entrance. And then she had chosen to stop. And the stopping had been clean. The way decisions are clean when the person making them has spent years preparing for the possibility that they would have to. He looked up at the branches. His father had planted this tree. His father had stood under it and understood something about growth that Yunji had not, which was that the most beautiful things are the ones you do not control. The tree had never been pruned. It grew in the shape it chose. And it was, as his mother had said, more beautiful than anything she had planned. He went inside. He opened the drawer of his desk and took out the pen with the tortoiseshell cap. He held it one last time, the weight of it, the way the cap fit, the way she had handed it to him in that shop and said, "This looks like it was waiting for you." She had been right. It had been waiting for him. And now the waiting was over. Not because the pen had changed, but because the person who held it had. He called Minjai. "Return it to the antique shop in Insadong. Tell them it served its owner well, and it is available now for the next person who recognizes it was waiting for them. Minjae came to the house. He took the pen with the care of someone who understood what it was, the last artifact of a version of Shin Daeyul that existed only when Orenthia was in the room. Not destroyed, released. The way you release something you love when keeping it has become a way of not moving forward. If you are still here, if you have stayed through every part, I want to tell you something before the final chapter. This story was never about the rivalry. It was never about business or acquisitions or who won the market. It was about the question you have been asking yourself since the first scene. What do you do when the person you loved becomes more themselves without you? The answer is the final chapter. Spring came to Seoul the way it always does, not gradually, but decisively, as though the city had been holding its breath for months and finally exhaled. The persimmon tree leafed out in a single week. Green filled the branches with the urgency of something that had been waiting. Orenthia came to the Seongbuk-dong residence to deliver the speaker list for the inaugural Park Lecture Series. She had selected 6 speakers from 4 continents, each one a person who had built something from displacement, each one chosen because their work changed the conditions that made the displacement possible in the first place. Yoonji met her at the front door. Not the side entrance, not the kitchen, not the corridor that led around the back of the house where deliveries arrived and where, for 7 years, Orenthia had entered. The front door. The one with the brass handle that Yoonji's husband had chosen when they built the house 40 years ago. The one that opened onto the main hall with the family photographs and the calligraphy scroll, and the view straight through to the garden where the persimmon tree stood. In 7 years of marriage to Shin Daeyul, Orenthia had never once entered through this door. She had been guided, always gently, always with a reasonable explanation, to the side. And she had gone. Because she was building a marriage, and she thought the side entrance was a temporary arrangement, a concession that would resolve itself when Yoonji finally saw her clearly. It never resolved. The side entrance became permanent, and the permanence became invisible, and the invisibility became the architecture of exclusion that defined her place in that family. Now Yoonji opened the front door and stood in it. They sat in the study. Through the window, the persimmon tree moved in the spring wind. "I am going to say something," Orenthia said, "and it is the last time I address the past directly between us. You took 7 years from me. You moved me to the side entrance of your house and the side entrance of your family. You created silences your son learned to replicate. You did this because I was powerful in a way you could not control, and the power frightened you, and you disguised the fear as propriety." She paused. "And now the harder thing. You are not the same woman. You have changed. Not completely. Change is a practice, and you are early in the practice, but you are practicing. You came to my hallway. You came to my lecture. You opened the front door. The front door is the thing that matters most," Orenthia said. "I know why," Yoonji said, and her voice carried something heavy and fragile. "Because it is the door I never opened for you. My husband noticed. He never said anything to me about it. He stood in the garden looking at his tree instead of looking at me for 3 years. The tree did not require him to perform. I did." She paused. "I gave both of you the side entrance in different ways. Him by requiring performance, you by denying presence." "We are not going to be friends," Orenthia said. "The right word is something that does not exist yet." 2 women who were on opposite sides of a wall and dismantled it together, standing in the open space where the wall was. "The open space," Yoonji said. "Yes, that is where we are." That evening, Calloway picked her up for dinner. He was early, which was unusual, and she understood that the earliness was not impatience but anticipation. The kind that belongs to a man who has learned that the best part of his day begins when a specific person appears. When he saw her, his face did the thing it always did, The private rearrangement that no one else would notice. The shift that said without saying anything, "There you are. There you are, and the world just organized itself around you again, and I am not going to pretend that is a small thing." "There you are," he said. "Here I am," she said. They drove into the Seoul evening together. The city lit up around them, tower by tower, bridge by bridge, the river catching the light and carrying it south toward the sea. Now, I told you at the beginning this was not a crawling back story. All of that was true, but it was not the whole thing. The whole thing is this. Orenthia did not win. There is no winning in a story like this. There is only building. She built a floor when the ground fell out. She built a reputation on her own work. She built a relationship with a man who saw her clearly and asked before he acted, and reached for her hand because the reaching was true. She built a connection with a woman who had tried to erase her and discovered that the woman was not a villain, but a person standing under a persimmon tree, trying to understand what she had done. She did not build these things to prove a point. She built them because building was the only response she knew to being torn down, and the building was its own reason, and the building was enough. And Dayol learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Not that he was wrong. He learned that he was wrong about the thing he was most certain about, and that the certainty was the problem, and that the certainty had been given to him by a woman who did not know how to love without controlling, and the control had cost him the only person who had ever made the control unnecessary. He did not get her back. Getting her back would have meant the story was about him, and the story was never about him. It was always about her. From the green dress in the restaurant to the list at the kitchen counter to the apartment in Yeonnam-dong to the buildings in Nairobi to the front door of the house. She was never invited through until the woman who built it finally understood what doors are for. Her. Orenthia Katie Maddox. A woman who was told she was an optics problem and responded by becoming the clearest thing in the room. If you have been holding on to someone else's definition of who you are, let it go. Not because it does not hurt. It hurts. Let it go because the hand that is holding it is the same hand you need to build with, and you cannot build with a closed fist. Open your hand. Pick up the tools. Build the floor. The people who left will see it from the outside. And the view from the outside is the only consequence that matters. Subscribe if this is your kind of story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave me a comment about the moment that stayed with you. Because mine is the front door. 7 years of side entrances, and then one Sunday in spring, the front door opened. That is the part where the whole story turned. That is the part where everyone in it became real. That is the whole thing. That is the whole thing right there.